Mike, how do questions of nutrition and healthy eating play out in your family practice? And if you have a few stories or one story of how you've worked with someone and you saw how you're able to help them move towards making healthier food choices or positive change.
Yeah, so great question. So maybe I'll, they say stories trump data, so maybe I'll just tell three sort of patient stories. So I guess one would be a sort of a typical patient, a woman who came in to see me. Typical in the sense she had tried many diets, was motivated to lose weight. That was one of the reasons she came in. And I think with her, you know, I could get into details, but really it was sort of reframing. Her sort of concept of sort of diet was more around a diet, a short-term change. I've got to find this sort of secret. And so our message was very much there is no secret, a bit of a shift to healthy eating as opposed to a diet. And I think for her, that was like, we talk about a sort of locus of control. And for her, it was sort of finding the secret to more, you know, it resides within yourself. A little bit about self-love and a little bit about, so she was in the cycle of, you know, goals that were too drastic, failing, and so on and so forth. So probably a kind of typical case, and more it was sort of reframing and coaching. The second one is something I see a lot where the problem wasn't around weight loss at all. Another woman who had a sort of very bad thing happen to her. She had very limited resources. And so when that happens with my patients, I kind of focus on the basics. You know, we obviously talk about the problems and how she's going to reframe that, but I sort of say, okay, let's just do four things. Let's just get you eating well, sleeping well. Let's get you what I call mingling. So, you know, I talk about, you know, isolation is a huge risk factor, and it's more making dates, and I don't mean that in the romantic sense of the word, but going out and going to a movie, even by yourself, but meeting with people. And then the final thing is walking. And we sort of just get people on this basics program. And of course, when she did that, she was sort of feeling like there's a lot of extraneous things in her life and a lot of emotional eating and so on and so forth. And so as a kind of outcome, a side effect, I would say, she lost some weight. And the third one is interesting. So I, you know, as you said in the intro, I have a kind of viral YouTube, as my wife says, I'm good at telling people things they already know. But I had this guy email me from Virginia, and he had been really incentivized by our video, and so he had set up this huge website that tracked his daily activity, really just focusing on whether he got half an hour or not. The second thing was his kind of very rough caloric intake. The third thing was his weight. That was what he was sort of interested in. And the fourth and probably most interesting thing was his sort of reflections. You know, this was a good day, this is a bad day. You know, you know, talking about his battles, not everything was great, and some days were easy, some days were not. And I always sort of like that kind of model, you know, kind of simple. And he's gone public with that, obviously, in a very big way. We see that a lot more in healthcare, that what we call sharers, people sharing their stories, and that kind of public declaration is kind of interesting. So those are some sort of, you know, kind of old world, typical world, and probably some new world problems that come into my clinic.
And it's a good example of food's a powerful thing in our health. It has the power to harm and the power to help. And Mike, you work with individuals. Kathryn, at the CFCC, we're doing work not on a one-on-one basis, but the community food centers work through grassroots programs on nutrition education. How does this work in a community food center?
Yeah, the hands-on cooking aspect of the community food center has become a kind of key part of the model and has kind of expanded and got more. We've put more thinking into this aspect of the community food center over time. basically it starts with bringing people together in the kitchen to cook, and this idea of the hands-on opportunity and the socializing and so on. Years and years ago, when community kitchens first came to Canada, I think people thought, they came from Peru, and they thought they would be a tool for revolutionary social change, which is interesting, but it never quite took hold in this environment. And then over time, they started to shift more towards the nutrition and the social aspects of cooking. But then they were criticized, and also as a way to save money, to alleviate poverty through sharing food costs and that kind of thing. But that also didn't work out quite so well, and they kind of came under attack as being too paltry a solution to too big a problem, and implying that you could solve people's poverty by teaching them how to soak their beans, or make a bean souffle or something like that, and sort of sending a boy on a man's mission, as they say. And so over time, I think we've been more realistic about what those kinds of programs can do, and we've looked more at their potential to specifically to build people's nutritional skills and move them towards healthier eating through inspiration and through the social contact that they can get in a community kitchen. And that this plays out in a number of programs at the Staff Community Food Centre and in other community food centres that we've started. And I just want to back up a second to say that we've realized that it's worth investing in, also as the kind of conversation in the world has gotten more louder around food, and we've begun to understand the importance in prevention of disease. We've realized that moving people from knowledge to skills to action is not that simple, and B, that it's worth investment. It's commensurately worth some time and effort to do that. So we tried to formalize and understand more what some of those mechanisms are, and we'll talk about what some of our theories are today. So at the Staff and other community food centres, there are a number of programs where these are implemented. They're often demographically focused, like a moms and kids community kitchen, men's community kitchen. There's one for Spanish speakers at the Stop, one for people living with mental illness, and so on and so forth. So I don't think we've figured out the magic bullet yet of what that thing is that moves us from knowledge to change, but as we get more intentional about trying to break down programs and formalize our objectives, we're getting further towards that.
I think in addition to the community kitchens, the community gardens have also shown to have some benefit to help people make healthier choices in their nutrition, but also for their physical health as well. So a lot of great programs. Mike, as you've said, you're really good at explaining to people things they already know. Your work on walking is really well known. Have you figured out a way to extend this no-nonsense, common sense approach to that you took with the walking video into an area of nutrition?
Yeah, we're sort of building one on that now. It's interesting. With 23 and a half hours, we said, okay, what's the most important thing you can do for your health? I keep getting invited to these physical activity conferences as if I'm a world expert on that. But it could have been cancer screening or smoking. That my answer happened to be activity and walking. And so it's taking all these different things and sort of saying, okay, what do I think works best? And other clinicians might have different answers to that. But this one's sort of interesting, sort of the opposite in a way, because when we look at moving, we're actually talking about healthy eating today, but if we look at obesity, say, in some ways it's sort of simple, calories in, calories out, and I actually sort of believe that. But of course, when you drill down, it's incredibly more complex. Kathryn and I were talking about culture. Culture stuff is very driven around that. A lot of that's built, so it's food marketing, it's our built environment, and so on and so forth. But there's all these sort of individual things. So there's genetics, there's supersizing. We move less. So I don't know if we take an Amish person. If that's a snapshot into the past a bit now, the average Canadian male walks about 9,200 steps, females about 7,500 steps. It's about 2,000 less in the US. The average Amish male walks 18,000 steps. The average female, 15,000 steps. So, our big, the couch in some ways is our new cigarette, if you know what I mean. Yeah, because we work out more, but we sit much more. We smoke less. But it's this inactivity. It's pushing the button so the door opens. And so, and again, the same is true with eating, is that, you know, we're sort of built a certain way, and there's all this sort of food available. And so it's kind of melting down that message. I also, you know, also think it's important to kind of see the big picture. So, I don't know, if I was the Minister of Health and you said, okay, would you put $1 zillion behind an obesity program or a walking program? In my clinic, I have a lot of more obese patients that are really fit. And when we look at their health outcomes, it's much better than the skinny sedentaries. Yet our society would see the skinny person as a healthy person. And so I think there's some sort of changing of the game a little bit there. And so in our videos, we're sort of planning one that's sort of about the science of it. So example, there's a great trial by Michael Dansinger taking the Zone versus Ornish, which is a low-fat diet, versus Weight Watchers versus Atkins, randomizing them. What's the biggest predictor of success? None of the diets. It was just how well people adhered to whichever diet they picked. So people always do well in diets. They think it's the diet, it's the secret of the diet, but it's more that they're just sticking to a food plan.
The sustainability of it.
Yeah, and then I think there's part of the art, you know, and probably a lot of what you guys do in your programming is around, you know, self-efficacy, you know, our ability to change, positive social networks, micro change, making small changes to people's weeks, and so on and so forth. It's a lot of facilitation. People think it's all about motivation, but it's, you know, it's cutting out the fruits, and motivation comes and goes, right? So facilitating cuts, you know, when you're a high motivation moment, you're cutting up the fruits and vegetables so they're at the front of the fridge when you're in your low motivation mode. So a lot of it's you know, just some planning, which I think you guys do a lot.
Just on the topic of obesity as well, I mean, it's a particular interest to us as an organization with an anti-poverty lens, because it is something that is experienced in greater, you know, numbers by people living in poverty, and it's just it can be viewed somewhat, I think, as another way to stigmatize low-income people, and really it's just one of the effects of poverty on health for poor people. So sort of singling it out too much as a separate thing for us is a problem. So we prefer to focus on the healthy at any weight and other types of indicators as well, besides just weight.